Welcome back to Inside Sources. I'm alongside Mara Carabello today, and we are talking about this United States Supreme Court. SCOTUS started its session, I think yesterday, started with some arguments, and there have been a lot of talk about what's going to happen this year and kind of where they're going.
Right. What's amazing, I'm just going to point out the obvious, but every case in front of the Supreme Court matters, right? Some are more technical, some are more, flashy, but by definition, they are the supreme ruling, and everything is designed to be pivotal, and that's what makes it so interesting.
Right, and for a case to even get to the Supreme Court means that it's been vetted through a number of. You have to go through the trial court. You have to go to the courts of appeals. If you go through the state system, you have to go through the state Supreme Courts usually. And the Supreme Court of the United States just doesn't take every case, obviously.
So I have a big question, or a broad question. I was reading through the docket, briefings, and there are two cases that involved ExxonMobil. Is it unusual that one specific company has, they're very different cases. Is it just coincidence that they both involve one company?
Yes, I would say that's the case. That was unusual, and
Okay.
They're completely different issues, but they both winded their way up to the Supreme Court, and that's highly unusual, but not problematic at all.
Right. I didn't think, but it is a coincidence that they're going to be busy this year.
Given that we just have a fairly limited list, you wouldn't expect two having the same name unless that name was Trump.
Right.
Because there are a lot of things going on with the Supreme Court that deal with executive orders, that deal with the potential, or at least the look-see of whether there's been a presidential overreach, and that's something that we're dealing with a lot. Now, there are two cases, Mara, that I want to mention that are not at the Supreme Court yet, but could very well be. And one of those, we all expected birthright citizenship to be on the docket for the Supreme Court, but it's not. And of course, that involves the Trump administration's attempt through executive order to do away with birthright citizenship based on the fact that so much has changed since that was enacted as the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which basically, which says all people born in the United States are citizens of the United States.
Right.
Pretty clear. But I think the executive branch is saying, well, that the framers and the people that enacted that at the time wasn't the framers, obviously. It was an amendment. But that people really weren't expecting that to mean people who just happen to be entering the country illegally and happen to have a baby here, suddenly that child becomes...
But that would be a new interpretation.
Absolutely.
It would be historically new.
Right, and I don't know that the Supreme Court's going to get there. But right now it's not even on the docket. Another one that I expected to be on the docket, which is not, involves what we're talking about. And the reason this one's maybe not, it hasn't gone through the system yet, but we've had cases in California, in Oregon, and in Illinois about the president sending National Guard troops into cities in apparent violation of what we call the Posse Comitatus Act, which is federal troops are not local law enforcement. And there shouldn't be that mixture. Those cases have not worked their way up to the Supreme Court. They may in the future, but right now, birthright citizenship and troop deployment into cities are not on the docket, but there's certainly a big list of others.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me if you look at the current docket. It's I won't get the exact count right, but 15, 16 cases that they've noticed up, and almost half of them have to do with executive powers.
Yep.
And I feel like our listeners will say, yes, that seems, whether you're for or against any individual issue, this is certainly an era in which the presidency, the executive branch, is unprecedentedly testing the powers of that branch of government.
Right. And if you recall, Mara, it happened under the Biden administration in one notable case, and that was student loan forgiveness, where the issue was, okay, the president issues an executive order, I'm going to forgive student loans, and the cases come flowing down saying you don't have the authority to do that. Trump has issued executive orders. Right out of the chute, he was signing them the day he was inaugurated. And so those are all being challenged because we rely on Congress. We rely on our legislative leaders to pass laws, not for the administration, for the president to issue an order just unilaterally or just changing something. But we do give the president great authority in the case of national emergency or in the case of insurrection, say, in case of something.
Extraordinary moments.
Yeah, where he can do that. And so he's used that power, some would say abused it, in issuing a lot of executive orders that are going to be challenged and are being challenged.
To give a taste of that, they'll be looking at the Trump tariffs, whether it's a major test on one of the boldest assertions of executive power that's been central to Trump's economic and trade agenda, the firing of the Fed officials as well as the firing of the Trade Commission, so looking at what the scope and purview is in that instance. I mean, those are just a couple of examples.
Yeah, and so tariffs, let's break those down a little bit. Tariffs, you expect, we have Congress that is given the power of the purse. And so when you talk about tariffs, you're talking about taxation, you're talking about raising money, you're talking about doing the things that have historically been the province of Congress, not the president.
Yeah.
And so suddenly he's issuing tariffs, and people are going, well, doesn't Congress have anything to do with that? Shouldn't they be involved in that process? He's saying, well, there's an emergency going on. You know, our budget crisis is an emergency. Our global trade deficit is an emergency, and somebody's got to do something about it. So I'm going to impose tariffs.
And something I think is really important when following, whether it's the lower courts or the Supreme Court, as someone who loves public policy, I always have to remind myself that the case is about the law, not necessarily the issue itself. So whether I'm passionate for or against, the point is, do you want to set a precedent about who makes what decision? So, I mean, I think we've grown into the habit of being for or against it based on our political or our public policy point of view on the subject matter. But rather, the way to look at the court is to say, how well is the law defined and how well will it keep and protect me as a citizen going forward?
No, that's brilliant. And it was the same way with student loan forgiveness. Whether you like it or not, the question is, did the president have the authority to do that? And in that case, it was not. That was really well said, Mara. The Supreme Court's not going to decide whether these tariffs are good or bad, or whether, hey, 25% is more than you should have. That's not their job. What they're going to decide is whether or not Trump overstepped his authority by imposing these tariffs, and whether or not there was truly a federal emergency in place, because that's when he can do that, or whether or not he overstepped what Congress should have done and didn't give them the chance to do it themselves.
Right, that's right. There are a couple of hot social issues coming up that actually Utah has grappled with and put into local law on these issues. One is the issue of transgendered sports participation. Another one that Utah has dealt with actually is what's called gay conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is an issue that our state legislature has dealt with. Right,
and that's actually one that was argued yesterday. The Supreme Court heard arguments on that exact issue. That was a Colorado law which outlawed gay conversion therapy. And a provider, a therapist, came in and said, you're taking away my First Amendment right to counsel people, to talk to people, to share my thoughts. Of course, the state of Colorado said, well, you're practicing medicine. You know, it's a
professional standard.
It's a professional thing, and we have studies that show that type of therapy has caused harm, that people have hurt themselves, have committed suicide, it's harmful. And so the issue became, what right does the state have to impose that type of therapy if in fact it does infringe on a therapist's right to talk to?
Right.
And that's what she said. The therapist is like, hey, I'm just exercising my First Amendment right. Somebody comes in and says, hey, I feel like I'm gay and my church doesn't like it. Is there something I can do about it? And that's really what it was about. It's a Christian-based argument about, hey, is it her
speech or is it a professional standard
exactly
regulation?
Right? And that one, who knows how that's going to come down? But it seemed like the court was, from what we're hearing about their arguments, was not crazy about the Colorado law.
Right. So, Greg, I'm interested in your take on a gun law that's coming up. We don't always have gun laws. Hawaii has an interesting case. I'm going to oversimplify it and say it pits private property rights against gun rights, against the Second Amendment. Right?
Yeah, it was an interesting law that said this: if you have a concealed carry, you have to get if you enter private property, you have to get the owner's permission to carry your gun.
Right.
So, in other words, somebody comes over to my house for dinner and they've got a gun. They have to say, "Hey, Scortis, I got a gun. Is it all right if I come on?" But that's not the best example. But
or
really,
rather, I have a private business,
right?
And I
Yeah,
post a
private
sign
business,
that
right.
says, "I don't allow guns
I don't
in
like
my
guns
private
here. Can
business."
you do that? And
Right.
that's a Second Amendment
I think
issue.
this one's so interesting
It
because it's equal right. So we value our private property rights, the rights to do what we want in our space. And the Second Amendment is also, as it's defined currently,
I know.
As an individual right, is also a very strident. I mean, people will double down behind
Two
that as well.
incredibly important rights
Yeah.
that are at conflict on that particular case. So that one will be very interesting. But
And
that's
this
a good
again will
one.
be what they choose to judge on, right? When you're
Right.
listening, it's not going to be, are you for or against gun laws? Are you for or against private property? It will be in the drafting and the artistry around what they're ruling on.
Exactly. That one will be fun to look at. We have so many more. We may get to those later.
Yeah.
But when we come back on Inside Sources, Utah Democrats may be eyeing some House bids as the newest congressional maps go in front of the courts. We're going to talk to Utah Democratic Chairman Brian King about that next.